All right, hello everyone. My name is Sharon White. I'm the head of marketing at BLT. Welcome to today's webinar, Dark Mode in Vitis, the new IDE. We're joined today by our speaker and resident BLT Vitis expert, Glenn Langen, and we have two panelists joining us from AMD, Chris Arndt and Nick Mullers, and another BLT engineer, Ellie, is helping with our chat panel. Before we get started, I just want to take a few minutes to introduce our speaker, panelists, BLT, and to go over some housekeeping. A few notes, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat panel. Ellie and I will be monitoring the chat panel for you. Today's webinar is being recorded and we will send out that recording once it's ready. It'll be about a week. There are no books or slides provided with today's talk. So first, let me introduce to you BLT. BLT has been in the engineering design services business for over 30 years. We were started by one of the original Xilinx FAEs, and our headquarters are in Maryland. We also have an office in Melbourne, Florida as well. We design chips, boards, software, and complete systems for commercial, military, and intelligence clients. Our designs are in space, undersea, and everywhere in between. We've been teaching AMD Xilinx training for 25 years. We're an AMD Premier Partner and authorized training provider. Our training is by engineers, for engineers, and we bring our decades of real-world design experience to the classroom. Our speaker today is Glenn Langen. He's one of our engineering managers here at BLT. Glenn is an embedded autonomy and robotics expert. His skills include engineering guidance, navigation and control, or GNC, software, and electronics for autonomous systems. Over the past several years, he has been the technical lead for several USV and UAV projects, primarily for the Navy. That included the careful coordination of the requirements for software, hardware, and electronics. He also has extensive experience with using and managing teams, using a wide variety of embedded software, hardware, middleware, IDEs, build tools, and libraries. And also joining us today, we have Chris and Nick. If you guys would both introduce yourselves. Chris, if you would start.
Yeah, Chris Arndt. I am the product marketing owner for the Vitis tools, including the Vitis new GUI that you're going to be seeing today from Glenn, as well as the AI engine tools, HLS, and the rest of the Vitis suite.
Great. Nick, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Nick. I'm working on HLS for about 5 years now, and I'm currently the product marketing manager for Vitis HLS.
Great. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
The last thing I want to do, since I am the marketing manager, before we get started, is I'd like to plug a few training opportunities we have coming up. So if you're interested in learning more about Vitis, we have our AI Engine 1 class on August 15th, Vitis HLS class at the end of August, and our Vitis Model Composer class in November. We also have a no-cost 4-hour workshop on the 3 Vs, Vitis, Versal, and Vivado, the difference between all of them in August. So I'm going to put all of those links in the chat panel for you. And if you have any questions about training, classes, or other services, Lisa Weaver is our go-to contact, and I'll put her information into the chat panel for you as well. All right, Glenn, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Sharon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is, again, Glenn. I'm an engineering manager and project engineer at BLT. I'm going to be going over with you all today the new Vitis Unified IDE. This IDE, it's got a number of new features that I'm going to go over with everyone. Going to be focusing on, based on my experience using the Vitis IDE day-to-day, what some of the new features are that are particularly useful, how you might use them in your flow, speak to my experience using the tool, and get some good introduction to how we'd want to adopt this tool as it becomes the default. Going over some of the high-level topics shown here, looking at some of the key new features and how we can integrate them with our day-to-day workflows. Now, the terminology for the tools, just to be clear up front, the current default tool is going to be being in future referred to as the classic IDE. So when I'm comparing the two, that's how I refer to it. While the new IDE that's going to become the default as of 2023.2 is the Vitis Unified IDE. Now, I will be demoing the different new features of this tool. So this is a preview version of the tool. To be clear, I'll show you how to enable it, use it, but there are some more features obviously going to be coming out, so I'll speak to some of them as well, though of course won't be able to demo every feature that's going to be available once it's the default as of version 23.2. And of course, I'll be leaning on Chris and Nick to provide the insight in terms of some of the roadmap for new features coming up for the tool. And also, before I jump in and get started showing off the tool, this is a live demo of a fairly new tool, so I ask for your forgiveness if I make any mistakes, need to backtrack a bit, but I don't anticipate any. But the key takeaways that we should expect from today is that this new update to the tool is coming out. It's going to be the default is 23.2, going over the key new features and very important, how to get started using them and some best practices suggestions as well. I was going to spend about 45 minutes going over the demo, having discussion on the tool, and then leave the last 15 minutes of the webinar for Q&A for any additional questions any of you guys might have, any additional things you'd like us to show about using the tool. So the topics going to be looking at first, of course, dark mode. We've been affectionately referring to this updated IDE as the dark mode IDE internally at BLT. We're fans of dark mode here. So we're looking at that and also some of the capabilities of integrating Visual Studio plugins. This preview version, we're not able to add custom plugins yet, but I'll show some of the ones that are there, some examples of ones you might add and how you would configure them once they're added, and go into some of the details of using some of the plugins that are added by default. Looking at the integrations with the Vitis tools that used to be separate IDEs or separate GUIs, in particular the Vitis Analyzer and Vitis HLS. And also a very important change, very important addition is the degree of Python integration. So we're going to look at what that means and some ways that you can use it in your day-to-day workflows. So I'm going to be demoing this in a VirtualBox Linux environment. Of course, the tool does work in Windows as well. I'm going to bring that up. And here we go. So this is the unified IDE, the preview that ships with 23.1. We can see that there's some rearrangements for the user interface. I'm going to go through those at a high level before digging into some of the details and, of course, how you enable this preview mode as well. So to start off with, we can see here all of the different categories of development that are supported by the tool. We now have support for HLS development and AI engine development, all integrated in this tool, as well as the Vitis Analyzer as well for looking at the reports generated by building, compiling, and simulating in these different development environments. The Vitis IDE supports highly heterogeneous designs that have a lot of different code entry methods, a lot of different target processors. They're all supported in this one tool for both code entry, simulation, debugging, very powerful ecosystem to work within. The sidebar over here shows some of the main views that we'll be working in throughout the demo here. Right now, we're at the Vitis components view, shown here. In this case, when we have a project open, we can see all of our source code. We've got our flow for stepping through the build options. So we'll show that example in just a moment. We do have a search utility. Once we enable a Git repo, our other source control, we can see that here. We've got our debugging options as well. So it's a bit different from the Vitis Classic, where we'd switch between the design view and the debug view. We now have this section here that we can bring up and step through debugging our source code. I'll also be heavily leveraging these examples that we get, clicking here. And we'll see that we've got examples for AI engines, for HLS, for different accelerated flows. So these can be very good starting points for getting an example project up and running to then build off of. And of course, for this demo, we can kind of get an idea of what a project looks like by opening up these examples and inspecting them. And then we do also have a separate view here for looking through all of the analysis reports that we get once we build and simulate our designs. All right, so brief overview of the new layout of the tool. So now I'm going to close it and show you guys how to get access to this preview version of the Vitis Unified IDE. Let's close it here. So here, I'm in my command line, just clear it out. So if you look at the help for the Vitis command line flags, we can see all of our default flags available. In addition, we have the new flag. This new flag is how we switch from the Vitis Classic IDE to the new Vitis Unified IDE. And we do also have a help flag for the new IDE as well. So I'll just run that. And see some of the options that we'll be getting for the new version of the IDE. So we can see here that we've got different modes to open the tool in for specific functions, such as we can open analysis files, we can open the GUI, which is the default. We can open a Python interactive shell. So as I mentioned, we do have Python integration now. We can get a shell for working with that directly. And we do have options also for sourcing pre-built Python scripts and launching a Jupyter Web IDE, a Web UI command line as well. For now, we're going to be opening up the GUI and taking a look through some of the example projects. Once we go through and see how that all is operating, we'll then drop back to here and look at some of the Python integration and batch scripting modes as well. So just Vitis with the -- new flag. And yes, thanks, Chris. Chris is pointing out that this is specifically for 23.1, that this is that's the version where this is available, starting with 23.1, and then 23.2 will be the default. All right, so now we're back in the GUI, so we can start looking through how to work with this tool by looking at an HLS project, HLS example project. And we'll show that now, as opposed to having a separate IDE, the Vitis HLS IDE, we have this unified IDE that can develop HLS in the same environment as we're working with our other code entry aspects of our project. So if we go to examples, drop down here, and let's look at the Aximaster example here. So if we select one of these examples, we then have a button to create this HLS project from the template. And we want to select a workspace, and I'll select this Vitis HLS workspace here. All right, so this all looks correct. Let's finish. All right, so this opened up our HLS project. We can see here we're in the Vitis components view here. So we've got this selection from the side menu selected. First off, we have in this panel all of our sources. So we can expand this project and we can see our source files here. Just one example.cpp HLS source file. You can also see settings as well. It by default opens the Vitis JSON file here, which we're seeing. We can look at these different config files and make changes. Select this one here. And we've got all the different options for the project once we open up the config file. Now, something that is one of the new enhancements with the Vitis Unified IDE is that when we make changes to these config files, they are immediately updated in the file system and vice versa. And we can actually see what the file system file looks like if we change the view here to the source editor. We can see this is the file that's being updated to match the configuration options that we're changing here. So this enables much more seamless integration between working through the command line directly with the files, or with scripts directly with the files, and working through the GUI as well. So say we've changed this to 100 megahertz. It will update immediately in the configuration file. All right. So take a quick look at the source file here. We can see that we've got some pretty advanced syntax highlighting enabled as well. There's some new IntelliSense integration with the Vitis tool as well to give some really powerful syntax highlighting as well. It's a very simple example. The next thing that we'll do is show the flow for synthesizing this design. And we can see here in this flow tab here, we've got all of the different options we've got for stepping through actually building and simulating our designs. And so for now, we're just going to hit the run here, and we can see the commands being run by the tool. It should just take a moment. And once this finishes, we're going to look at some of the logs that are generated for stepping through the project flow. As everyone is familiar with the Tickle integrations from the Xilinx tools, and now with this unified IDE, we've got some equivalent capability in Python as an alternative. So all of the different commands I've been running through this project have been being recorded in a log file for the project as Python commands, so that I can use that build.log file to create a script that can be revision controlled and then rerun to recreate this project. Because that's one of the best practices when working with these tools, rather than manually recreating or rerunning through all of the different flows. We want to try to script those operations and place them under revision control. And the degree of integration between the GUI commands and the automatic recording in Python is much improved in the Vitis Unified IDE compared to the previous Tickle integration. And it got a lot of power as well with the Python integrations as well. So we'll take a quick look at the log that was created and then use it to recreate this project and rerun the synthesis as well. So we can open up a terminal within the tool, which is another handy new feature, allowing a better integration between the command line based flows and the GUI based flows. And what I'm going to do here is create a script from the log file that was created. Now we can see inside the logs directory for the project, we have a Python builder.py file. So going to copy that outside the project and use it to create a script to recreate this project. Slightly different flow than what you normally do, but just doing a quick demo here. So let's go back to directory, copy the builder.py file here, quickly change its directory that it's going to create the file in. It's going to create the project in. And we can see here the different Python commands that it's going to do. It's going to step through creating the project and just change the directory it's putting it in. It's going to create the project and then run synthesis for us automatically. All right. So let's drop back to my main command line to run that. So I can see here in the list of help for the new Vitis GUI that we've got a source command here that we can use to pass in this script that we've just created. So that's the -s flag, builder.py. And we'll see that when this runs, it runs through the script in a non-GUI flow, similar to how when you're working with, say, Vivado, you can run in non-project mode to run through scripts without the GUI popping up as part of the process. So we can see here it's creating a new project in the HLS2 directory that I specified in the script. And now it's running through synthesis. And one thing to point out while this is running is there are a good number of example Python scripts that you can reference that come with 23.1. I'll show quickly the file browser where those are located. And we'll also copy it into the chat as well, the path. So it's in the install directory that you've got for Vitis. In this case, on my machine, it's opt Xilinx Vitis 23.1. And in there, it's under the CLI, command line interface examples directory. And we see we've got a wide variety of Python scripts that we can use as a starting point for building our own. And of course, due to the fact that the builder.py script logs all the commands running in the GUI, a very handy flow that we use internally at BLT for a lot of our work is to first run through the commands we want to be scripted in the GUI, look at what the logged commands are just as needed, and then we've got our script. So that's a very powerful flow as well, now that the GUI is logging pretty much all actions in that builder.py Python file. So very powerful feature. And Sharon did copy the path into the chat. Thanks, Sharon. All right, so now the project has been recreated. It's run through synthesis. So let's open up this new project and look at the reports, the analysis. So let's bring up the GUI. That's one that I did skip one step there, so apologies. You can, in the command line, specify the workspace you want to open. We can, of course, open up now that we're in the GUI, but I did want to demonstrate that. There's a flag to specify the path to the workspace to open. In this case, though, it tells us we haven't yet opened a workspace, and we can just select this here to go and select it. So we put it in the HLS2 directory here. So we can hit OK. And then this will open it up. There we go. So now we see under components, we've got same source files. And we see that under synthesis has been completed. Now we can look at the different reports, basic summary information. We've got a synthesis report that shows information on the synthesis. We see the target device, see the QR. So we've successfully recreated this project and resynthesized it using the Python scripting capability. So as you can see, very powerful. We can do a lot with this to really streamline our projects and, very importantly, revision control them, not just the source files, but the actual commands necessary to recreate the project from scratch and then go through the build flow to improve consistency and also keep track of the history of changes you might be making to that. All right, so now one other thing that we can look at here before looking at the equivalent AI engine flow is if we go under the preferences for the Vitis Unified IDE, we can quickly look at some of the plugins, the extensions available, and also the configurability of the dark mode setting. Oops. So here we can see we can change between light and dark mode here. And also if we go under the overall global settings, we can see everything that can be configured, both for your user account and also for the current project. And we can search them as well. So we can turn dark mode back on. You just search for color. And second. I seem to be forgetting the exact name of the setting. But we can change it back through here.
I think it's
Get
a
that
theme. It's called themes, I think, Glenn.
theme. Ah, yes. For some reason, color theme wasn't showing up in the search. Okay, but right now we're under light Vitis, so we can just change it to dark Vitis. All right. So sorry about that. Not much time on the stick for this particular version. But here we can see it's changing back and forth automatically. We can search through here for any setting we need to change. And the one other category of settings that I think is important to highlight is that we now have this section for extensions. So right now, the ability to add custom extensions isn't available in this preview version. We can see here we've got some examples of the kinds of things that we can add, some very powerful capabilities here. In particular, I'll be demonstrating some of the capabilities of the integration with Git, ability to revision control our project and see different information about the revision control within the tool. We also have some important integrations for things like CMake, and all of the options for configuring them are in these sections here. All right, so now the next use case that I'm going to be walking through some of the important aspects of is using the Vitis Unified IDE for working with AI engine development. So we also have a good selection of example projects for AI engine development as well. So we go under the examples, look here, and a good number of options. I'm going to be looking at one that contains multiple AI engines so we can see how they're connected as well. So let's look at simple change here. So same deal, we got some basic information and the button here to create the project from the template. And just call it AI engine for the workspace name. And we do need to select a base platform here. So basically what hardware is this going to be targeting? And we can select the VCK190 dev board base platform. If you create your own additional custom base platforms or download base platforms for additional boards, they'll show up here. You do also have options to select a specific part. If you don't yet have a platform or don't want to use the custom platforms, and if you have an XSA, a exported XSA from Vivado, we can also import that through here as well. It's a lot of ways to import the necessary hardware information to kick off AI engine development. For today, though, we're going to be working with the VCK190 dev board. So this information and all looks correct. Let's start it up. All right, so now very similar layout to HLS. Again, pointing out it's the same tool. We haven't need to open up a new dedicated tool for the AI engine or for HLS. It's all unified within the single IDE. We've got the same layout here where we've got our settings, different config files we can modify. We've got a CMake make file to edit as well. Under sources, we've got all of our source code and data for input output to test benches. And for the AI engines, the way they work is we've got a test bench file that can be used by the simulation to run through the AI engine and test things out. We've got a header file here that defines what kernels are going to be deployed to the AI engine, how they're connected, and then the actual kernels, the code they'll be running is in the kernels subdirectory here. And we'll take a look at those in more detail once we kick off some builds. So we can see here that under the flow, we've got some different options for the AI engines as broken down between the two possible simulation targets. The first being the x86 simulation, which is quick and easy, runs real fast, does basic functional verification by compiling the AI engine to run on our host development machine. So just build that, should be done very quickly. And now the other target here is the AI engine simulator, or the hardware flow, where it will be cross-compiled to run in those environments. Takes longer to build, longer to emulate if you're running through that AI simulator, but gives you more accurate results, obviously, and more information. And I'll use this as an opportunity to highlight another important new feature of the unified IDE, the fact that previously for the Vitis Classic IDE, if you're running a build, you couldn't do a whole lot of other operations at the same time. That is no longer the case. So I can, in the background, kick this build off and go through demoing other aspects of AI engine development in the unified IDE while this is running in the background, and then show the results, the Vitis Analyzer reports of that once it's done, which otherwise they simply take too long to make sense to do during one of these demos. So I'll kick off that build. And while that's running, take a look at some of the other information. So our simulation, x86 simulation did complete. Go into summary, we can see basic information about the build. If we go under graph, we can see a visual representation of this system. So in this case, we've got our two kernels, consumer, producer. And the way the AI engine works, it's a 2D array of vector processors. You write C code for them, compile that C code, it runs on those processors, and then in this header file here, we define what kernels we're going to be running and how they're interconnected. In this case, we got two kernels. One of them just creates data that it forwards to the next one, then writes it out to in the hardware, it'd be the programmable logic it's writing to, and in this simulation case, it's going to be writing to the output.txt file. Take a quick look at the producer kernel here, just see what that source code looks like. Very simple. We've just got this for loop here that writes out incrementing data value to the consumer. So now the what we can do with the x86 simulation very quickly and easily is to check to make sure our code, just the basic things right. Is our algorithm correct? And we can do that through debugging. We hit the debug in the flow window. We switch to our debug view here. We start out in a state where we've hit a breakpoint on the initialization of the graph. And we've got all of the controls here to continue stepping through the code and inspect the state of the different variables as we do so, and the ability to add new breakpoints as the execution occurs in this debugging session. Here we see our project.cpp file. It's a basic test bench file that starts up our AI engine, runs it 4 times, and then stops. So let's quickly add a breakpoint in our producer here. So I want to see this I variable incrementing every single time this for loop goes through. So if we just select this line, we can add a breakpoint here. So now when this line is reached, the debugger will break. Let's run, and here we go. So we've broken on this line here. If we look under variables, we can see that we've got our data value. We can expand this and look at the contents of that array. We can also see our I variable is set to 0. If we continue to run and hit this breakpoint, I will increment every single time. So this is a very quick, short turnaround way to get basic debugging information of, is our code correct before we then take the longer time to go through the full cross compile for running on hardware or in the emulator. I want to make sure that we don't have any basic bugs before we go to the trouble of that extra step. So let's go back to our, let's stop debugging first. Go back to our main view here. And we can see that our build completed. Whoops, I shouldn't have clicked that. Our build completed in parallel with our debugging session. And yeah, I accidentally clicked this here, and due to conditional builds, it didn't rebuild everything. So also very useful. If we can look at the reports here, we'll have much more detailed information now as it's actually fully compiling to be deployed onto the hardware. In the summary, we can see a fair bit more information about, for example, the number of AI engine tiles that are being used in the design, just basically how it's going to be deployed to the actual AI engine hardware, how many interfaces we have between the programmable logic and the AI engines, information like that. We have the same graph view as we saw earlier, but with some additional details of how these two kernels are actually talking to one another. We've got a ping pong memory buffer here, for example, between the two. As we select the different components within this Vitis Analyzer display, and to be clear, I should have mentioned this up front, this is the Vitis Analyzer. It used to be a separate tool, you needed to constantly be opening and closing it to get information. Now it's fully seamlessly integrated. It's a very powerful tool for AI engine development. As we select different components here, we can see them highlighted in the details view here. We've got a link to the source that we can click on and see the source for that particular kernel, and other information about where it's physically being placed, things like that. You can select the buffers here. You can see the details of the memory buffers between the kernels. A lot of very useful information to understand, given the source code that we've provided the compiler, how it actually decided to map that application onto the AI engine itself. We do also have some additional information that we receive from this more complete build. We've got this array view where we see even more granularly exactly how the AI engine is being configured. We've got all of the different tiles for the VCK 190, 400 in total, and where the different kernels have been placed. Same deal where we can click on them and then see the information highlighted down below. So that shows the basics of working with these different domains within the new unified IDE. The next thing that I want to highlight is one of the new extensions that's been enabled within the unified IDE, the integration with revision control, Git specifically. So I'm going to go through some of the new abilities that we've got for revision controlling our projects and seeing the status of that revision control from within this IDE. So for right now, within this project, we have no revision control enabled yet. If we go under the source control here, no repository found. So I'm going to open up a command line terminal here to run through some setup operations. In this case, just going to run git init to set up a repo. And this is how I'm demoing it for right now. You normally have other flows, other integrations with tools. But for quick demo, we can just initialize a repo here and add some files. And here we see all the different files now that are not being revision controlled in the project. So let's just as a quick demo, add all of the files. And we see the status now is that they've been added, and run a quick commit. And of course, if you're familiar with similar tools like VS Code, similar integrations, such as what you get in VS Code, you do have all the GUI buttons as well to do the operations. So just running through, I just tend to use the command line for Git operations out of habit. But now we see that we've added all of the files. And normally you'd add a bunch of them to the git ignore, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm adding them all. We see that we've got no changes within this repository, and we can see under commits, we've got a single initial commit of all of these files changed. If we then make a modification to one of our files, Just add a new line. Here we can see that now we have a modified file immediately popping up here. Just a quick demo. We can right click and do different Git operations such as stage changes. Status from the command line, see the same information. We've got a staged file that's been modified, and commit this as well. And now we have an additional commit here. So there's a lot of powerful capabilities in these kinds of integrations, a lot of different ways to inspect the repository. We can enable different displays to do things like showing who changed the last line as we're viewing the code here. A lot of powerful capabilities. And of course, as it switches from the preview to the default version, we'll have the ability to add additional extensions that can have even further integrations for our workflow. Like for right now, we've got a GitHub extension enabled by default. At BLT, we tend to use GitLab, so might add an extension for that. There's quite a variety of extensions, and I'd let Chris and Nick speak to the level of ability to customize all of this, but there's quite a variety of extensions available for Visual Studio provided in the link shown here. All right, so the demo portion of the webinar has ended exactly at 45 minutes. I'll say that that was planned. So with this, we can move on to Q&A, see what additional things would be good for us to highlight as part of this. And of course, Chris and Nick, if you've got anything to add, feel free.
Thanks, Glenn. We'll let you go ahead and start.
All right, so just going through the questions.
All right, Glenn, we have a question. Is there a particular reason in your selection of Ubuntu 18.04 version?
Yeah, the particular version 18.04 is supported. That's simply the default that we've had at BLT for a bit. So other versions will work as well. It's simply what was available at the time. The 20.04 version would probably be my recommendation for what you would want to be using.
Okay. Next question is there a drop-down window to select the different options? For instance, the dark mode versus the light mode.
Yeah, there is some drop downs at the least, particularly for the dark mode and light mode. Under preferences, we can see we've got some options here, in particular color theme. We've got the selection between light and dark we can choose between.
So Chris already mentioned this in the chat panel, but maybe you guys can talk about it. Do you need a license for the AI engine to use it in Vitis?
Some features you would need the license for, and you can acquire that license from the Xilinx website, in particular for running through the compilation for hardware for emulation. You do need that license set up on your machine.
And of course, as Chris mentioned in the chat panel, the license is free.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a free license that you can generate. Yeah. I just also, I mean, I did mention in the chat, AI engine is very new. So there's a lot of hardware and software differences from anything you've used before. So we highly recommend you take the training, and BLT is one of our good partners in helping with that. there, so just want to encourage people to do that. I can take this next one. So one of the questions here, Sharon, was right that the Vitis AI included in the unified IDE, or still separate. And at this point in time, Vitis AI is not included. It's really a different target, for user base. It's what they're doing there. So it is not included in this tool flow at this point in time. I think I would also probably pick up this other one here related, Sharon, was about the integration of the standard HDL flows and stuff. And so those are not included in this as well. I mean, you can drive them via Tickle, but really Vivado is, it's an EDA tool. RTL design is more of an EDA type design, and it has a lot of features very specific to that. We recommend you use the right tool for the right job. And so Vivado really is still the right tool to do for HDL design versus Vitis. Vitis is really more targeted towards the software side of things. All of the stuff that Glenn was showing, right, was around doing software type development. HLS is doing software development that you can then export. He didn't really show this part, but you can export those as IP and bring them into Vivado, right? So there is a flow for doing that. Or you can use it as an accelerator. So, yeah. Great questions, though. These are good things.
All right. The next question we've got. So Ellie already answered a little bit, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth. Is it the same process on Windows to open the new Vitis GUI?
Yeah, same process. You've got the same command line options. You do need to be running it from the command line, though. So you do need to have some command prompt up to be providing those options. But the same commands are available, same process. BLT, typically to get a command line in Windows, we use Git for Windows, actually. But I imagine everyone's got their own flow for doing that. Yeah,
let me actually interject a little bit, Glenn. So in 23.1, we do not really have a Windows version of the IDE yet. That's coming in 23.2. So Windows OS support will be coming. And that'll be targeted at the design flows that support Windows, such as HLS development, which you showed, and then also sort of embedded, the standard embedded, like if you're targeting an ARM device. AI engine tools still are only going to be a Linux-based flow at this time.
All right, next question. You did show the Python scripts. Can we use Python scripts to run certain algorithms on the AI engine?
So the Python is natively supported to run on the AI engines. Not you can't directly run scripts on the AI engines. Unfortunately, those are C++ code they'd be using for those, with additional graph code layer also in C++ for interconnecting all of the kernels you're creating.
Yeah, probably what you were showing really, Glenn, right? But the focus was that using the Python to drive the project creation and management and that kind of thing. Yes. That was the feedback we gotten on the previous version. The classic IDE is I want to script and project manage. This, and we didn't really have that capability with the previous Eclipse GUI, so it's something we focused on here.
Yes. Yeah, I think from my perspective, that's one of the most important improvements, because revision controlling the scripts for your project is very, very useful to be able to do. So this is, that's very much appreciated that this has been added.
All right, and this was also answered by Chris, but just so we have it out loud for everyone, is this now available in Vitis 2023.1 as a beta version? I think we were going through some of the early, that's the beginning of the webinar. So I don't know, Chris, if you want to talk more.
Yeah, I can repeat that. Yeah. Basically what Glenn was showing was, yes, this is available in 23.1 as a preview. Like I mentioned earlier, it is only available on Linux. operating systems. But if you've installed 23.1, you just use the -- new switch and you can open up the GUI and start looking at things.
And the follow-on question is, when is the 2023.2 coming?
Before the end of the year. So yeah, we don't usually give out hard dates as we try to close, but I would look at it before the end of this year. Yeah.
Great. And then we did have a question, Chris, this is probably targeted to you as well, about asking if we can get an HDL or VHDL and system Verilog flow along with the HLS one.
Yeah, we did already sort of mention that, right, but we keep the hardware development inside of Vivado. That's where we feel like that's the best place for doing hardware development. So that will remain there. And Vivado and Vitis will continue to complement each other.
All right, do we have any other questions from the attendees? Anyone else have questions? Chris and Nick, anything else you want to say about the new IDE?
Nick, I'll let you have a few words and then I can add something to it.
No, I think we're good. I think it was a really good presentation for the new IDE. You show a lot of features that we don't usually promote in our marketing materials, so I was really happy to see that. So yeah, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
We
All
did
right, I
get
do see a couple more
Yeah.
coming in, so go ahead and I'll leave with some closing things once we get through that.
All right. So the next question is AMD making a dark mode for Vivado?
I wish I could say yes, but as far as I know, that's not in the current plans. We have a lot of other things we're working on in Vivado, and that's fortunately not in the current roadmap.
All right. Next question is, this tool is basically one or more extension of VS Code. Will you make the Vitis VS Code extensions available in the VS Code extensions marketplace?
Great question. So this is actually not VS Code extensions. This is built on top of Eclipse Thea, which is built around the open source VS Code editor. But we chose to go this way because it gives us a lot more flexibility. And as you know, the Xilinx, or well, I should say AMD. Sorry, you can tell I've been around for a long time. The AMD, FPGA market and the use cases are a little different than your standard software. So it gives us the ability to add new features, especially with AI Engine. We could add some unique capabilities by using the Eclipse Thea. It also allowed us to integrate like HLS and all that together into this. We've been able to push stuff back into the Eclipse Thea as well. Some of our features, we've been able to work with the open source community and help them add that. So it's based on Eclipse Thea, which is different than a classic Eclipse. So if you look it up, you'll find that there's a whole new section, and most of the Eclipse organization has shifted their focus to that environment. That said, it is integrate well because it's built around the VS Code editor, then to the extensions, the marketplace, all of that. There is a lot of sharing there and capabilities as Glenn was showing. So we haven't opened all that up yet, partially because there is, whenever you open up extensions, there's always some, potential for things to break. And so we're trying to find the best way to do that while we get this online. So look for some more to come in that area. Great questions, though.
All right. Any other questions? All right, Chris, you had some final thoughts? Oh, we have one. Is Vivado license opened up in Vitis and Python?
Not sure I understand the question on that one, William. Maybe you could rephrase it. I don't know, Glenn, if you understand what he's asking, feel free to comment.
I'm not exactly clear myself.
I see. Yes, so Vitis itself doesn't require a license. Vivado does. There is the Webpack version, which is for smaller devices, and in that case, you can use Vitis. But if you do need to target a large device, and of course, Vivado is under the hood for that, you would have to do a paid license. So So we have a tiered structure there. You talk to your FAE or BLT, and they can kind of help you with some of that as well. Okay, I'll close with this, and then and I would just say, thanks to Glenn and the team for putting together this demo over at BLT. This has been great. It's been really appreciated working with them. And I would encourage all of you to go out there and try it. The more you try this and give us feedback, the easier it is for us to incorporate. We're actively looking for people to poke around in the tool and give us the feedback. So please do that. And when you do, there is a survey option. You can fill out a survey. It was on that front page that Glenn showed earlier. You can click and send it. You can send us direct feedback. We're monitoring that pretty closely, as this is a early access and trying to get as much feedback as we can. So thank you very much. And Glenn, Sharon, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Fritz. It's been great working with you as well.
All right, well, we appreciate everyone for joining us today. We do have some Vitis related training coming up, so please join us for that if you're interested. We have our free no-cost workshop coming up in August on the 3 Vs, plus we have the AI engine class, HLS class, and the Vitis model composer. 2 of those are in August and 1 is in November. And then if you need to check out what's on our calendar to see all of our other classes, we have lots of trainings related to Vivado, Vitis, and everything that's AMD Xilinx. So again, I appreciate you joining us. This video will be available in about a week, and we'll include all of the links that were sent in the chat panel, as well as some of the things that were talked about. So Chris and Nick, we really appreciate your time joining us here today. Glenn, thank you for sharing, giving us a tour and sharing your expertise with us today.
Thanks for having us. I think Glenn is popping up the IDE just to show one last thing real quick. Underneath, sorry, Chris mentioned the way to give feedback. If you look in the bottom right corner there, there's that online resources heading, and then it says bottom 2 things there are feedback and a survey, and those 2 links will send you 2 forms that get sent directly to me and Chris and our team. So please do take a moment to fill those out after you try the tool.
All right, well, we appreciate everyone for joining us, and we'll provide all of that information in the email when it goes out in about a week. All right. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.